Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last day of ISS. This is IC course 87, Wheeled Mobility Assessment and Delivery. Has the pandemic changed this for the better? With Maureen Mclain and Alfred Lee. I'm Joe Stratman. I will be moderating this session. I will give out the CU code at the end, like always. Please keep your mics muted throughout this presentation. We will open it up later on for questions and answers. And then I'll turn it over to you guys, Maureen and Alfred.
Good morning, everyone. I think on behalf of Alfred and myself, we just want to thank you for this opportunity, and we're excited to kind of talk about how things have gone in terms of wheel mobility assessment and delivery in the setting of the pandemic. Just make sure. All right, so our objectives, rightfully so, I think the pandemic has trained us all to be very flexible. So when we first kind of presented this idea, we were very early days. And so our thoughts about what to say during this talk have kind of changed and evolved as we've made it through the pandemic. So today what we hope to do is give an overview of pre-pandemic practice models and how they shifted from March 2020 for VA prosthetic staff and wheel mobility clinics. I think one of the benefits that the VA has is we do have kind of that in-house prosthetics and logistics staff. And so Alfred is going to help kind of give us that perspective from his kind of subject matter expertise. We want to discuss the lessons learned from rapid transition to virtual care, and then review current trends in practice and areas that may continue to benefit from the use of virtual care as we move towards hopefully our new normal. I think we've all been saying that for the last 2 years, but hopefully we're headed towards a new normal. Because things have changed so much, we thought it was a good place to start with just setting the scene. I think pre-pandemic probably feels like 800 years ago. But what we wanted to do is just kind of review where the VA was at that time. So virtual appointments were encouraged by national leadership, which TRUI sites developed to advance the use of telehealth. So even before the pandemic hit, we were really seeing this as a modality to kind of investigate how we can use, especially to outreach to our more rural veterans. A variety of program offices and facilities already had existing telehealth models. So we were really looking at telehealth that was being used in primary care, mental health, telederm, and then telerehab was really kind of starting to come online in late 2019, early 2020. Implementation was slowly progressing. And when I look back now, our goals seem so like they were going to be a big reach. And then once the pandemic hit, I think that what it took to make that happen made those goals seem so small. So it's interesting how times can change perspective. Kind of going off of what I already hinted at here, the VA really had an advantage in the sense that it already had a video visit system that was a fully functional platform. And additionally, our leadership was very much looking forward in terms of making sure to get the regulations adjusted to allow for us to treat veterans across state lines. So if you were working in a VA clinic that was near state lines, you would be able to treat all the patients within those within that VA region, even if it was across state lines. And then support for VVC. So we have a program that allows for us to send VA-owned devices out to veterans. So if we have a veteran who is unable to use their own device to complete these visits, we're able to kind of send those devices out, provide training to them to make sure that as much as possible, technology is not the limiting factor for providing these services. And then, as I mentioned before, VA prosthetics and logistics is an in-house service for us. And so that really allows us to leverage economies of scale due to large volume purchasing at national levels for some items. Early response to COVID. So really, we went from kind of a reality of face-to-face care that we all knew to what felt like overnight, seeing most face-to-face clinical appointments stopped unless they were deemed critical, and that there was no other format for that visit to be practical. As we kind of came out of that initial lockdown and facilities opened up to more face-to-face care, our face-to-face capacity was greatly reduced. And so virtual appointments really played a critical role in the timely provision of that care. Then ongoing impacts of COVID, I'm probably saying what you all know already, as we go through various waves of variants and different local levels of transmission rates, what we're having to do is to continue to be flexible to adjust how we're providing care. So returning to face-to-face visits at pre-pandemic levels have kind of ebbed and flowed based on the local demands, the local transmission rates and resources available. And what that's done is really kind of allowed us to use the lessons that we've learned through the pandemic and kind of have a continued flexibility with the use of virtual visits that I would say probably most of us would have been reticent to adopt so readily had the pandemic not forced our hand. And so kind of using that flexibility to continue to provide care. And then, we've kind of touched on this already, but what we're finding the benefits of using our VA Video Connect platform is that for most veterans, this is more convenient for them. So they're not having to commute long distances. They're spending less time either in their own personal vehicle or on public transportation to get to us. We can use these visits to do initial screenings for better triage and identification of the problems, which is allowing us to resolve those problems more rapidly. And sometimes we're able to see higher volumes of veterans because we're not having to travel to homes to do home assessments. We're able to kind of use that time that we would have been spent traveling to either address any issues with that veteran or see another veteran. So I'm going to turn it over to Alfred to talk about kind of how prosthetic has implemented some of these ideas.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. So hi, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the implementation ideas for prosthetics and how we team up with our clinical partners. And just a quick clarification. We are formally called Prosthetics and Sensory Aid Service. Yes, we make artificial limbs, but our scope is more than that. We are the funding and logistical case management arm for DME that's individually issued to individual patients and veterans. And the scope ranges from commodes to surgical implants, and wheeled mobility devices fall well within that. And I just kind of, when our veterans are confused on why their wheeled mobility device how it relates to artificial limbs, I'll just tell them that we are the VA quartermasters, and then they realize, oh, okay, we're the logistics arm of doing things. And then from a wheeled mobility perspective, we focus on improving home access and transportation with our clinical partners. And we want to collaborate with all the stakeholders to holistically address these issues to optimize their equipment in their living environment. And like Maureen says, many veterans live far away from medical centers, and we want to make care more convenient for patients and leverage our existing technology resources to do that and streamline our own work. And even though we're not on the clinical side, I still suggest that you use consent forms for electronic video meetings. And if you don't have one, I would really highly suggest working to develop a model for that. Next slide, Maureen. Okay, so as I said, most of our access is on home access equipment for wheeled mobility devices. And one of the things here is that the challenge that we have had is that site visits are needed for project management standpoints. But with the distance and juggling multiple personal schedules between stakeholders, that can be a challenge. And so allowing us to do virtual visits can really help streamline and be a useful adjunct for this. These travel coordinations can be optimized, and And so for an example, as clinicians can perform their individual evaluation, and then the prosthetic case manager can join in at the end to discuss proposed equipment logistics and how things might work down the future. And then we can also then juggle this with multiple clinicians. So this is really helpful from our standpoint, instead of driving, a couple hours away for just to tag in at the end and then come back. So this is really helpful for our own workload. Next slide, Maureen. So again, I talked about project coordination and really just wanted just to put up a few bullet points here about how we can make assessments more efficient from the standpoint of all stakeholders. Next slide. Okay, so HISA grant, this is called the Home Improvement and Structural Alterations Grant. And just a little bit about this is we do a lot of home access equipment, which has delivery costs and installation costs, which we can do. But however, what may not be clear in these cases is that by federal law and Congress, prosthetic budgeted dollars cannot be spent on home modification and construction projects. If it's something that we are installing, that's one thing, but actually to rip out a doorway and doing things like that, we cannot do. Specifically, using that example, we can put offset hinges in, but we really can't modify and install those, but we can't modify the door for that. And then so this program, the HISA program, in a sense, helps to really bridge some of those things. And just up there is a few projects that can be covered that all really have access to mobility issues and how we can improve that access in the home. And then as a final thought to this is a fixed one-time grant benefit. While it can fund multiple small projects, once the maximum amount is spent, the benefit eligibility then is exhausted. And there's a difference between if $2,000 or $6,800. $2,000 is for somebody who is non-service connected, and $6,800 is the maximum amount for a service connected veteran. And this has to do with the injuries that they've been rated for during their military service. I'll often refer to this kind of as the workman's comp of the military. Next slide. So just a quick view of a few of these things. These are just a few ideas of how to implement HISA site visits from a telehealth or virtual care point of view, and the things that we've done to streamline the work and make it more efficient and also conducive and easier for the veterans. Next slide. And so here this is our HISA agenda template. It just gives a few nuts and bolts ideas of things that can be utilized from the standpoint of a telehealth virtual care visit for HISA type grants. And this is not at all an end to be all list of things, but just a few nuggets that you can pass on of how we've found it to be effective to use telehealth with HISA type program manager. Okay. So the next few slides, I just want to do an overview of an area called the VBA. And the Veterans Benefit Administration is technically a fully separate component of the VA. Most of us here would be involved in the VA healthcare side, but the Veterans Benefit Administration provides things such as disabilities and manages several programs. And unlike the VHA, general medical and functional need requirements are not involved in the determination of eligibility. The VBA general eligibility requirements require significant injury while on duty during military service. And general program eligibilities really include some type of permanent loss of limb or eye, and this can be physical or a functional loss. And then also I might like to add, for most of these programs, an ALS diagnosis has a specific carve out of eligibility, whether their expected loss of function has occurred or is still in sometime in the future. Next slide. Okay, so this is something that I thought was helpful, and I wish that when I was in clinical practice that I knew more of. But I'm here just to wrap up my section here with a few slides highlighting some of the key components of these VBA programs. And at the end of our presentation, there's a couple of resource slides that give links to the more in-depth, but this is really just a few key components of the program, so you have a little bit of a working knowledge. And then if this is something that you're going to be helping your patient, then you would have some resource to be able to give some more in-depth detail. Also, so grant programs are separate and specific to the VBA, and the VHA healthcare has minimal jurisdiction over these programs. We'll often collaborate with members of the VBA on behalf of a veteran, but really we don't have any influence for that. And then I also might like to add that veteran service organizations can assist and advocate during the application processes for these programs. And a few veteran service organizations that are the VFW, the American Foreign Legion, and a few others. And I talked about HISA before earlier, and HISA is a little bit unique because prosthetics actually does determine the eligibility based on the established criteria and manages the program, while the VBA provides the funding. So that's how we get around. That's how it's worked, where we are able to manage a program and provide construction dollars, albeit a small amount, because the VBA is providing the funding for this, and not the healthcare side. Next slide. So just a few key points about the auto adaptive equipment program. I want to make clear that this is separate from the regular prosthetics authority to provide vehicle egress and ingress for these. So for example, vehicle lift installations like scooter lifts or wheelchair lifts that are either bumper mounted or sit within the back or well of a pickup truck. Those are things that are done, that we have specific authority to do, but we actually can't modify equipment such as vehicle hand control and maybe steering adaptions. Again, general service connected has to do with the permanent loss of limb or eye and a few other things with that. And then also the whole thing of this program is that it provides the funding to modify a van so that it's accessible for whatever the physical needs are. And then another component to this is that a veteran may be eligible for a one-time grant to partially fund the vehicle for procurement. And a veteran can adapt two vehicles in a 4-year period. So essentially, every other year, they could upgrade and adapt a new vehicle. Okay, next slide. Just a few things here. Wanted just to highlight a few points for collaboration opportunities. And really, most of this is done on the clinical side. And primarily from our perspective, we're usually just doing the final checkout to make sure that things are okay. and the person is satisfied with the van modifications. Next slide. So this is another large funding from the VBA side, which is due to housing assistance grants. And these are several programs that help to support modifying the home for a service-connected veteran. And, I just one of the things that's important is that the injury needs to be specifically related to their service connection. And probably the easiest example for this is if somebody is service connected for ALS, then that's their service connection then specifically relates to their eligibility for the program, versus normal service connection is if somebody needs a power wheelchair and they're 50% service connected, because they're above their 50% service connection, they're considered service connection. So in this case, their diagnosis needs to be included and related for their eligibility, in addition to the service connection. So a few things is the specially adapted housing grant. This is the largest grant. It actually provides up to $101,754 to modify a home. The annual budgeting is for 120 cases a year. So, I mean, this is a lot. This is a very large grant, but also it's only budgeted for 120 cases a year. If a veteran, if that has been maximized before already, so that then what the veteran can reapply in another year. The Special Home Adaptation Grant is another grant. It's a smaller grant. It's only approximately $22,000 of funding that's available for the program, but it's also one of the grants. And finally, the TRA grant, the Temporary Residence Assistance Grant. This is a grant that funds temporary modifications for, let's say, if you were living in a family member's home while you're utilizing the grant, the bigger grants for permanent modifications. The funding amount is dependent upon what you're eligible for with the other housing and grants. So the next slide. So really just kind of want to bring home just a few things about collaborating with the VBA. In general, what we are trying to do is we want to maximize, prosthetics wants to maximize the benefits that an individual veteran has and utilize them in the most effective way possible. And so just as a real world example is that normally prosthetics would provide a single vertical platform lift to give access into a home, but because the VBA requires contracts to follow commercial ADA regulations, we will install a second VPL or ramp in order so that a person has two avenues to get into or out of their house. And another example would be that, let's say a ramp is needed, and instead of constructing a ramp and having that use their grant dollars, we'll be able to offer a modular ramp, which is a prefabricated ramp that can go into a home to provide that access without utilizing construction for something, let's say, such as a wooden ramp, which needs construction dollars. Again, we're just really trying to maximize construction dollars, and especially in the California, San Francisco Bay Area, construction dollars, even though these are generous, they actually really don't go that far in this area of the country. So we're really looking out, trying to advocate for veterans and their case. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Maureen.
All right, thank you, Alfred. So what I'd like to do is kind of cover the clinician side of the house. So Alfred and I oftentimes team up together. And so thinking about as a physical therapist, how we've kind of used these resources to continue to operate our CD and mobility clinics. I've kind of broken it down into general places where we have are able to, and I guess topics of how we're able to continue using telehealth to provide CD and mobility resources. So one of the ways that was actually kind of where we started to pilot using this modality was addressing repair requests. So this was one area that we had already started working on pre-pandemic. And I think for any of the clinicians in the house, my least favorite phone call is the repair request at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. That seems to be always when something wants to break. And what we found is being able to use VVC, where we could do an on-demand session to really triage the needs, allowed us to provide much more efficient and timely services. I would say, it's not possible always for me to repair or address every repair request, but oftentimes by being able to do a quick check-in with a veteran whom I'm familiar with, it allows me to do a quick clinical assessment and really make sure that we're getting them to the right place. I think everyone would agree that sometimes a call about an issue with someone's wheelchair may come across verbally as being that something mechanically is wrong. And the further you dig in and kind of ask your why questions, you may realize that it's really related to fit and function rather than a mechanical issue where we may want to send out a repair technician. It also allows us to check for basics. So I work in a primarily geriatric rehab outpatient setting. So it's common that it may be something as easy as, I'm noticing that that's not plugged in, right? So them being able to visually walk me through the issue that they're having allows us to kind of take care of the easy low-hanging fruit right off the bat. And then also, in certain environments, what I found is that it saves a visit, because if I have either a veteran who is mechanically inclined and is someone whose case I'm very familiar with, or we have a family member or a caregiver, or they're in an institution where there is someone with skills on the other end of the call, that we may be able to make some minor adjustments through that VVC call. And so what we're finding is that this was a really easy way to kind of maximize how we're able to interact with veterans to address their needs. Not all things can be fixed though through VVC. I think we've probably all found that. And so even if we kind of complete the phone call and we realize, okay, or I shouldn't say phone call, but video call, hey, this isn't something that we can repair at that time. We need some assistance. We need to get a technician out there. What we have found is that by having that quick triage phone call, oftentimes we are able to shorten that time to resolve the problem. And the reason for that is, instead of having a prosthetics console, which is kind of how we ask for that service in the VA system, instead of putting one in that says veteran states wheelchair is broken, we're able to be much more specific about what is broken. So instead of prosthetics sending out a repair technician to assess the situation, come back with a quote, get approval for that quote, then get the parts, then make the repair, we're able to kind of cut out some of those steps and to get that repair done quicker. The other thing that this does, it allows, is to keep the clinician in the loop for repeat issues. I think one example that I have found is I had a veteran who had a decline in his function that I wasn't aware of. And what clued me in that we needed to bring him in and do some more training and to address that decline in function was that he kept breaking his brake. And so it was that repeated break issue that kind of brought to the forefront that he was having that decline in function, that got him back in, and we could work on some training. So obviously we fixed the break, but also it was kind of a way to make sure to provide, I guess, 360 care in terms of really understanding why that breakdown, that mechanical issue was happening. Because for him, it was very much a functional mobility impairment that was driving kind of that issue with his wheelchair. The next area that we have found, so the clinic where I work at, we have a multidisciplinary mobility clinic evaluation process. So we have a physiatrist and a physical therapist and occupational therapist that all contribute to the evaluation and assessment for someone with a mobility request. What we found is we were able to transition our mobility clinic evaluations very quickly in response to COVID-19. I think the thing that really stuck out kind of as a clinical pearl with all of this was kind of spending some time practicing and thinking through, okay, what is it that we really are looking at from a, what is it that we're looking at in a face-to-face environment? What are the things that I want to see? And like I said, our population really is more of a geriatric, more ambulatory population. And so what we wanted to look at some of those same physical performance measures that we were looking at in person. How could we safely transition those to a virtual environment? This really required us to do some pre-planning, to really kind of think through as a group, all right, how can we do that? How can we still maintain the same quality of evaluation and assessment, making sure that we're still able to do kind of that same level of care. And we found that we were actually able to, for the majority of our cases, translate that evaluation that happened face-to-face to a virtual care. And what we're finding is now we are able to reach more rural veterans that previously may have really struggled to come into our clinic by having this VVC option. You know, like I said in the previous slide, this definitely isn't something that works 100% of the time. So there definitely have been times where we get the video visit, and despite being able to send out VA-owned equipment, being able to do training sessions ahead of the evaluation session to make sure that the veteran is proficient in using that technology, there still are times where all we see are nose hairs. And despite multiple attempts to kind of coach someone through how to set up the camera so that way we can see what we need to see, and how to set up an environment so that way we can do the assessments that we're doing, there are still times where it's just either not feasible, the veteran isn't able to do it, they don't have a caregiver or someone within where they're staying that is able to help, or it's just not safe. We realize that their function isn't safe to complete that evaluation. And so when that does happen, oftentimes then how we start the video visit is to explain that we're going to do our best that we can through VVC, and there's still a potential that they may have to come in and see us face to face. The third area where we're finding that this has been very helpful. So if we kind of think about types of outreach, coordinating care with other clinical locations has been another way that we've been able to use VA Video Connect, or that telehealth option, in order to provide care. There are two settings that this really sticks out for in my clinical practice. And the first one being calling into a community-based outpatient clinic. So some of our more rural sites will have a smaller outpatient clinic that have VA staff there that allow us to kind of coordinate. So if we have someone at the main site that has specialist certification or higher level skills, that we're able to still kind of translate some of those higher level services to our more rural locations. The second location that we found, or I have found in my clinical practice, is our state veteran homes. So we have veteran homes that operate like skilled nursing facilities or long-term care facilities that are run to support veterans, but by Washington State is where I'm located, so by the state. And so we have been able to develop MOUs with those sites to allow for us to provide care to those veterans within those facilities. Some of the services that we've been able to do both to the CBOCs and to the state veterans homes have been evaluations. So new patients who have a need for a device, fit and training. So once we have the device, getting them out to doing some of the fit and the wheelchair skills training. If they have a change in status, so there's someone that's familiar to us and we need to make an adjustment, or addressing any repair requests. So this is probably the easiest place that we found some of those translations, because oftentimes we have someone who may not have the specific wheelchair expertise, but they have enough adjacent knowledge that we can do competency training, or it can be a teamwork, right? So we have a specialist on the provider site location, and then we have the other VA employee or the state employee on the veteran site side of the appointment to provide that technical support. In our CBOCs, so like I said, we oftentimes have the clinical specialist at the main site, and we have another VA employee. So that may look like another physical or occupational therapist who doesn't have the seating mobility specialty, or it may be a TCT. So that's our I think it's a VA specific term, but that is our telehealth technician who is able to help coordinate kind of the technology and act as the hands for the provider and the eyes and the ears, and kind of manage the technology to make the visit go smoothly. What we found is that what makes this go easiest is to kind of do some pre-planning. For our local CBOCs, I've done site visits ahead of time, so I know what does the office layout look like, being a good colleague, what space am I able to use, how far does our video connection go, what are some of the physical elements of each individual clinic that I might want to use to evaluate someone's wheelchair skills. And then what equipment is needed. So oftentimes the CBOCs may or may not have a physical therapy gym. So I may want to make sure to pre-position measurement devices, cones, any obstacle devices, or anything that I want to use to complete that evaluation, I may want to pre-position. So we just have a kind of a toolbox that has all of that, all of those things at the CBOC. And then, does the veteran site staff need additional training? I think that's another really important one. So kind of doing that pre-planning. If you have someone that you have a really good rapport with, it can make those visits a lot easier and a lot less stressful by doing some of that pre-planning. And then the soldiers' homes. So like I said before, these are state facilities. They really are kind of analogous to a skilled nursing or long-term care facility. It is similar to the CBOCs in that we need for pre-planning. Pre-pandemic, these were sites that we would go and do a on-site clinic once or twice a month to address any seating and mobility needs. But with the pandemic, what we found is multiple things. Initial periods of lockdown, initial periods not only of lockdown, but that the veterans were not allowed to leave the facility to come to us. And then as outbreaks and increased transmission has occurred throughout the soldiers' home, kind of varying degrees of being able to kind of get those veterans either to come into the clinic or to participate in a video visit. And so being able to have VVC has allowed us to maintain a certain level of care because we are able to connect virtually. Prior relationships, because we used to do an on-site clinic, actually made it much easier to translate this into virtual care. We had a rehab nurse manager at the soldiers' home who was very familiar with what we did. So we kind of had a pre-established shorthand, for lack of a better way to say it, that then allowed us to quickly transition into virtual care. Things like having multiple camera setups, so I could see multiple angles, kind of knowing ahead of time how far they needed the camera to be away, so that way I could actually see the person in the wheelchair from a functional standpoint, being able to see them, not only how they sit in the chair, but also how they use the chair to get around the facility, have been kind of things that we've worked out over the last couple of years. And so I think those have been lessons learned in terms of pre-planning to really understand how to translate all of those things that you do in a face-to-face visit that you may not think about, and translate that into a virtual setting where you may have to be better at verbally calling out what you want, or having an understanding with the person who is on the veteran side. Additionally, making sure that they had all the supplies, just like at the seat box. So same thing, making sure that they have all the measurement tools, and they have some of the tools that we use for wheelchair skills assessment. And then home assessment. I would say home assessment oftentimes is the hardest location for us to do for us to do VA Video Connect visits. And part of the reason for that is oftentimes these are the visits that I have the least amount of support. So obviously, if I'm calling into a location that is an outpatient clinic or a state home, I already have built-in support to that visit. Home assessments can sometimes be a little bit of a mystery. So sometimes it's a veteran that I already know. It's a veteran where I have some information, and we may be just looking at kind of doing a home assessment in terms of making sure that the wheelchair that we're trialing, it not only meets their needs when they come to see me in the clinic, but also in their home environment, and kind of updating the plan of care to their individual needs. The most challenging really is those veterans that I don't know, who we may or may not have caregiver support to kind of act as a camera person or act as another set of hands. Our new evaluation requests in the home setting oftentimes kind of fall into three categories. So we see kind of someone who has graduated from hospice but still needs hospice level equipment, someone who is post-hospitalization, or someone who's homebound, and we can't get them out, we can't get a caregiver in, and we're trying to kind of problem solve how to best meet their needs. I do have to say, one of the benefits that I'm very much aware of working as a physical therapist for the VA is that we really are mandated to put the veteran first. So I am able to get them stopgap equipment while we figure out kind of a long-term solution without any penalties of not being able to get them what they need in the future. So I don't have to write to insurances or really kind of fight for that justification. We have great support from prosthetics to make sure that we are doing right by the veteran. And I think the easy way to put it is, if I have a geriatric person who's a fall risk, the cost of a hospitalization is much higher than the cost of using a historical stock device to kind of bridge the gap while we kind of are fitting and trialing, finding their ultimate device. I would say for these types of patients, so that new evaluation where we're going in a little bit more blind, it can oftentimes be the most challenging. So these are often where I may be triaging needs, and we may be setting them up to say, hey, they need further technology training so we can do this, or I may be trying to get them in, or kind of trying to see if we can get one of our home-based therapists out, so that way we have a little bit more support. So those are the areas where we have found kind of the best use or most frequent types of visits that we are using for video visits for the provision of seating and mobility. I'm going to turn it back over to Alfred.
All right, just to recap, just a few of our conclusions is, I think both Marie and I, and I'm sure many others will say that it's really important that you don't that this is not thought of as a direct replacement for face-to-face appointments. Many people strongly identify with in-person meetings and are technology adverse. And really, it's most useful when it's thought of as some type of adjunct, and it's framed as an additional tool to make things more convenient for your veteran patient or just patient. To describe how it's really beneficial to other people on the team, especially when it's used for a triaging and screening type of thing. And then finally, it's really important to be patient because everybody has differing levels of technology. So thank you very much. We'll move to, here's our contact information. If you have any questions after that. And Maureen, before we take questions, can you go to the next slide? So just a couple of resource slides that we put in. This is an internal, unfortunately for just our VA colleagues, but we are not able to grant access or have the ability to grant access to outside emails. But this is an MS Teams page. The goal is we're working to centralize information so that there's resources out for everybody and kind of collating them so that we can have best practices shared across our system and be able to collaborate. The whole idea is that if I'm in California and a veteran is moving to Washington, we're working to then establish a network so that we can do warm handoffs. So, and then this is just giving, also helping people to have resources to help grow their programs. I encourage everybody to join that. And then finally, here is just resources of a lot of things I spoke about of the various types of programs, and they all have very specific eligibility requirements and limitations, and these links spell them out. I also wanted to point out one last thing is, if you haven't heard, there is an official prosthetic rehabilitation items and services policy directive that's just been put out, and both the rehab and prosthetics program offices are disseminating this information. But this is the per se the directives that of how we can operate. So if there's a question, this is where we would want to all go to see if this is an appropriate device or what the policy directives are. So with that, we'll open it up for any questions that people have.
So it looks like, Alfred, we have a couple in the chat box, so I'll just read them out and then we can answer them.
Okay.
This one probably is directed towards me. So Liz asked, can you describe the PT-OT video assessment? Do you use any standardized assessments? Do you have any documentation templates that you can share? So Liz, definitely, my email is in the previous slides above. Feel free to reach out to me and I can email you all of our templates. In terms of the PT-OT assessment, it depends. So we kind of look at this from 3 standpoints. So one is our multidisciplinary evaluation. So that team is really looking at kind of the global picture, the global, we like to call it our mobility plan of care. And so from there, we're looking at kind of what are that person's needs. Oftentimes what that looks like is someone is coming in from my population. So this is just my own treatment area. What that looks like is we have a veteran who's coming in asking for either a scooter or a power mobility device. And so I can definitely send you the template that we use for that. Obviously that assessment looks a little bit different than how we do labor division at my clinic. Is the OTs do the power mobility side of the house and the PTs do the manual wheelchair side of the house. And so obviously we do have veterans who will then go directly to PT for a PT assessment. So I can send you those standardized assessments. And then the OTs, I can ask my colleagues to for their template as well. So feel free to email me and I'd be happy to share those templates. Darren asked, is there a time that the vendor assists with video where the veteran would have trouble connecting? Yes, so we are able to work with our local vendors to do that. Oftentimes, though, we may find that it's easier, more convenient to coordinate with caregivers. So I think it just depends on kind of local situations. But yes, we have definitely been able to use vendors to assist in certain circumstances. Alfred, is there anything you want to add to that before I go to the next question?
No, that would be my experience too. I mean, the vendors are always happy to assist and to the best of their abilities, but obviously that's not their primary focus.
Yeah. And then I just want to, it looks like this might be a statement from Liz, but I also would, I would endorse this as well. So she says, I find that even getting minimal information from a video in their home has value and adds to the overall assessment. Yes, 1000%. I still remember the days of having people bring me in pictures, or like they're you know, I'm drawing out a floor plan and they're trying to tell me, or we're having to schedule a visit, you know, a long ways off to try to get into the home to problem solve. And so I think having this technology has been very much a benefit. And not to sound like my glasses are too rosy shaded, but I do think one of the major benefits of COVID-19 is I think it has forced all of us to practice and try, because that was how we could do it. And I think there are some, while there may be many reasons why COVID has been horrible, I think that it has allowed us to kind of see the benefit of the information that we can get. So Liz, I think you're spot on there. And I think that is all of the questions we have in the chat. Are there any other questions from the group before we turn it back over to the moderators?
I was going to add one other thing with regards to what Liz said, and even we have found on our sides of filling out forms when, you know, we're not sure what they're asking or what section they may be, and they'll literally can hold up the form in front of the camera and say, what do you mean right here? And then we can then address it from that standpoint. So again, great adjunct tool to be able to use any type of video platform to get things addressed.
Any other questions from the group? If not, I can give out the code. Thank you, Maureen and Alfred, for a wonderful presentation. For those of you that don't have chat, I will speak the code to you guys now. It is A4A29U, and I will be putting it in the chat. Oh, thank you, Becca. I appreciate it. All righty. Well, guys, that's all we have for this one. Thank you very much for your attendance, and we will see you on the next sessions.
Thank you, everyone.